After being away from here for a very long time, I've noticed that a lot of people are wondering why we do not do something as quote unquote simple as sending people to the moon or to Mars to live there as a one-way trip. Now, although it is an interesting thing to speculate on, it is also something that you need to understand is infinitely more complicated than you may think. So I would like to describe to you some of the hurdles and the big steps that we have to take to make sure that the average person traveling in space does not instantaneously and horrifically slowly suffer until their death. So, to truly understand these sort of hidden engineering and biological hurdles of deep space travel, we have to look at the problems that arise not from cataclysmic failures, but from the simple, relentless reality of existing in such a closed system for years on end. Now I'll try and get through as many as I can as fast as possible within 5 minutes. It's going to be a bit of a speedrun challenge. You're going to have to keep up. On Earth, gravity acts as a constant pump, pulling your blood and interstitial fluids towards your legs. Your heart has evolved to push against this force to get oxygen to your brain, and in space, that downward pull vanishes instantly, leading to a problem called fluid shift. So within minutes of reaching orbit, your legs become skinny and your face swells up. And this isn't just cosmetic. The extra fluid in your head increases intracranial pressure. This pressure leads to something called SANS, funny I know, Spaceflight Associated Neuroocular Syndrome. So because the fluid is pushing against the back of the eyeball, the eye actually flattens, and this changes the focal length of your vision, meaning astronauts who had perfect 20/20 vision on Earth often needed space glasses to read their controls. For a mission to Mars, scientists are terrified that this pressure might permanently damage the optic nerve, leading to partial blindness before the crew even arrived. Now on Earth, gravity is also our best janitor. It pulls dust, hair, and drop crumbs onto the floor where they spay. In a spacecraft, the floor is literally an illusion. There is no floor. Every human sheds about 500 million skin cells a day, fun fact. In a spacecraft, these do not fall. They form a permanent swirling cloud of human dust. This dust can get into electronics, clogs air, CO2 scrubbers, and most dangerously gets inhaled. Astronauts frequently suffer from space coughs and eye irritation because they are constantly breathing in their own and their crewmates' dead skin. Because astronauts don't walk, the thick skin on the bottom of their feet dies and begins to peel off in large leathery sheets too. If an astronaut takes their socks off in the middle of the cabin, they can instantly trigger something called a skin blizzard, and it can take hours for the ventilation system to clear it. Now, a common misconception is that space is cold, and while a vacuum is technically near absolute zero, a vacuum is also the perfect insulator. It is effectively like living in a giant thermos. So, every electronic component, every light bulb, and every human body, which, fun fact, puts out about 100 watts of heat, is constantly dumping thermal energy into the cabin. On Earth, air carries that heat away, and in space there is no air outside to take said heat. To keep the crew from literally cooking inside their ship, spacecraft must have massive wing-like external radiators. These panels use ammonia or water loops to carry heat outside of the surface, where the heat is sort of bled off into the void as infrared radiation. If those radiators fail, the ship becomes an oven within hours, regardless of how cold the surrounding vacuum is. Now in a house on Earth, if you buy a new plastic shower curtain or paint a wall, you just open a window to let that chemical smell out. In a spacecraft, there are no windows to open. Every material, from little drops of glue in the Velcro to the insulation on the wires, release trace amounts of gases over time, and in a sealed environment like this, these volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, can accumulate. Over a multi-year mission, a slightly smelly plastic could eventually reach toxic concentrations that can cause liver damage and neurological issues. Now NASA actually have a man in particular, which in my opinion is a very funny story. His name is George Aldrich, whose primary job for decades has been to smell every single item going into space. If George says a certain type of ink or plastic smells too bold, it is banned from the mission. Computers can detect chemicals, but only a human nose can determine if a smell is pungent enough to drive a crew insane in this small tin can for 3+ years. Without gravity, convection, the process of hot air rising or cold air sinking, does not exist. This can create two very bizarre and dangerous hazards. If an astronaut sleeps in a corner with poor ventilation, the CO2 they inhale does not move away, and it stays in front of their face like a CO2 bubble. They can literally suffocate in their sleep while surrounded by a room full of oxygen, simply because the air doesn't move. Because hot air doesn't rise, a flame doesn't draw in new oxygen from the bottom. It is much harder to detect because it doesn't produce any smoke. and it is much harder to extinguish because you can't just smother it. You have to physically disrupt the sphere of gas. Now, I hope you enjoyed this absolute bombardment of facts, and if you would like more, let me know. It's actually quite fun. Feels like a challenge.